The story surfaced as a minor headline, barely registering in the news cycle. A mother of 2 from rural Oklahoma, suddenly hospitalized with symptoms that left medical professionals baffled, sleeplessness that stretched for days, obsessive behaviors that appeared without warning, panic attacks that came in relentless waves. Her vital signs remained puzzlingly normal, yet her mind was fracturing before her family's eyes. As doctors monitored her condition over 6 agonizing days, she revealed something that sent chills through the hospital staff, confessing that for months, every decision she made, every emotion she experienced, felt foreign, manipulated, as if orchestrated by an unseen presence. A voice behind the curtain of consciousness, subtle and patient, had gradually assumed control. This wasn't supernatural possession or hallucination, but something far more insidious, invisible, yet devastatingly real. What she had experienced represented a perfect storm of psychological manipulation, techniques rooted in tactics predating written history. These powerful tools of influence weren't created in modern laboratories or research facilities. They were refined and weaponized through centuries of human understanding of instinct, power dynamics, and primal fear. And now, in our hyper-connected era, they've undergone a terrifying evolution. They've gone digital, reaching into our homes, our minds, our lives, with unprecedented precision and scale. The truth lurking beneath our everyday interactions is more disturbing than any fictional tale. These mechanisms are not mystical enchantments or clever illusions. They are meticulously engineered psychological tools, designed specifically to hijack the fundamental pillars of human consciousness, our attention systems, our motivational drives, our memory formation, and perhaps most disturbingly, our capacity for empathy. They operate with clinical precision just below our conscious awareness, thriving in seemingly innocent marketing campaigns that suddenly create needs we never knew we had, embedding themselves in the subtle patterns of abusive relationships, where victims gradually lose their sense of reality, powering political propaganda that transforms reasonable people into ideological extremists, and perhaps most pervasively, fueling digital algorithms that track, predict, and modify behavior with such accuracy, they often understand our next move before we consciously decide it ourselves. Dark psychology is not an anomaly or accident in our social landscape. It is deliberate, methodically deployed, extensively rehearsed, and frequently rewarded with power, profit, and control. Its unmistakable signature appears when minor disagreements mysteriously escalate into explosive, irrational rage. When charismatic influencers cultivate followers who defend them despite mounting evidence of harm, when carefully crafted messages reshape deeply held beliefs and personal identities virtually overnight. The most chilling reality we must confront is not whether someone has been psychologically manipulated, but rather how many times it has happened without the slightest flicker of recognition. How many decisions we confidently call our own were actually architected in boardrooms, laboratories, and digital marketing departments. Before becoming a modern buzzword traded in self-help seminars and online forums, the origins of dark psychology were anything but obscure. They were etched into the primordial survival codes of early human tribes, where manipulation meant power, social influence translated to security, and tactical deception often spelled the difference between survival and extinction. Throughout the ancient world, military strategists from Sun Tzu in China to Machiavelli in Renaissance Italy meticulously recorded these principles in their influential works, carefully veiling psychological warfare under more palatable terms like influence, persuasion, or political cunning. As organized religion and monarchies rose to dominance across civilizations, these manipulative frameworks were systematically refined and institutionalized, not to empower the common people, but to condition them toward compliance. Elaborate rituals that inspired awe, rigid hierarchies that prevented questioning, powerful symbols that bypassed rational thought, even the terrifying concept of eternal punishment after death. Each element was precisely engineered, not merely for spiritual belief, but for complete psychological control. By the dawn of the 20th century, these ancient techniques became intertwined with emerging behavioral science, as intelligence agencies and advertising corporations engaged in a silent race to master the human mind, methodically searching for the psychological triggers that could manipulate crowds, sway critical elections, or systematically crush political dissent. These formulations of influence remained partially obscured, buried in classified academic journals, redacted military files, and corporate marketing strategies. The refined science of control patiently waiting for the perfect delivery system. Then came the digital revolution, with its unprecedented access to human attention and behavior. Suddenly, the waiting ended in spectacular fashion. The twist surfaced quietly, hidden behind innocuous interfaces and user agreements no one bothered to read. What once required expert interrogators working for days or hypnotic repetition over months could now be executed effortlessly with a few well-placed app notifications, carefully curated social feed, or an algorithm's micro-targeted recommendation. Tech giants, armed with petabytes of behavioral data collected from billions of unwitting users, had created the most effective psychological weaponry in human history, systems so sophisticated they could predict emotional responses with clinical precision. Dark patterns became standard interface design, cross-platforms we use daily, not as occasional tricks, but as fundamental building blocks of our digital experience. The algorithms evolved beyond merely delivering what triggered dopamine rushes. They learned to identify exactly what incited fear, loneliness, and outrage in each individual user, and more disturbingly, how to sustain these emotional states for maximum engagement. Entire populations were nudged, primed, and polarized into opposing camps, not through overt coercion that might trigger resistance, but through perfectly timed psychological cues that methodically widened existing fractures in social belief systems. The game fundamentally changed. It was no longer about convincing someone through rational argument, or even emotional appeal. It was about imperceptibly shaping the informational context around a person until the desired decision felt like the only rational choice they could possibly make. This manipulation never announced itself or knocked on the front door of consciousness. Instead, it silently reprogrammed the very walls of the mental house we inhabit, altering perception itself. The terrifying irony that emerged was how often the victims participated willingly in their own manipulation, eagerly trading privacy for convenience, mistaking constant surveillance for personalized care, confusing algorithmic influence for freedom of choice. What began as academic behavioral science in university laboratories had evolved into a near-invisible architecture for managing human thought at population scale, and perhaps the most dangerous aspect was that those exploiting these systems rarely saw themselves as villains, but rather as innovators, rarely recognized the profound damage they inflicted while optimizing for user engagement and platform growth. Brain scans now tell an even darker tale. Neurologists analyzing long-term subjects exposed to high-frequency digital interaction patterns have documented alarming structural changes in regions responsible for emotional regulation and memory processing. In adolescence particularly, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, shows dramatically heightened activation patterns, while the prefrontal cortex, crucial for judgment and impulse control, appears increasingly suppressed. This isn't theoretical speculation. It's visibly measurable, consistently repeatable, and growing more prevalent. Depression rates climb steadily upward. Anxiety disorders manifest earlier in life. Dissociative episodes become commonplace. Even severe psychosomatic symptoms, like debilitating chronic fatigue and unexplained gastrointestinal distress, are increasingly traced, not merely to screen time, but specifically to algorithm-triggered psychological conditioning cycles. The human nervous system evolved for brief periods of acute stress followed by recovery, not the perpetual state of reactive arousal millions now experience, a constant low-grade psychological fever so pervasive, many mistake it for normal existence. One particularly chilling CDC report revealed hospitalizations for self-harm among teenagers surged nearly 40% within just 3 years, a timeline that shadows with disturbing precision the widespread adoption of algorithm-optimized social platforms. The cost manifests in haunting human terms, visible in the hollowed eyes of young people who haven't experienced restful sleep in months, in the anguished faces of parents clutching unread suicide notes written by children they thought were merely quiet, in the deafening silence of crucial moments where someone should have reached out for connection, but instead scrolled deeper into isolation. Perhaps most disturbing of all, this silent epidemic continues to accelerate in plain sight, while the true architects behind these systems remain largely invisible to public scrutiny, financially insulated from consequences, and disturbingly indifferent to the human devastation their engagement metrics represent. What comes next is nothing short of a psychological arms race that threatens the very foundation of human autonomy. Emerging technologies like generative AI that creates perfect deepfakes indistinguishable from reality, brain-computer interfaces that bypass conscious consent entirely, and emotion, detecting wearables that harvest our innermost feelings, are converging to redefine influence itself. The manipulation landscape is evolving from reactive to predictive to preemptive, no longer content to simply respond to our behaviors but determined to shape them before they manifest. The next frontier of psychological control will not merely guess emotions, it will sculpt them in real time with terrifying precision, leveraging live biometric data to customize persuasive stimuli that resonate with each individual's unique vulnerabilities. In shadowed government facilities, officials are already beta testing advanced sentiment analysis tools designed to detect and diffuse public unrest before protests can materialize. Silicon Valley startups compete fiercely to perfect emotional AI systems that claim to detect lies, uncover fears, and extract hidden desires with greater accuracy than the most skilled human interrogators. Perhaps most concerning is the accelerating integration of virtual and augmented reality environments into daily life, where the boundary between externally planted suggestion and internally generated belief gradually dissolves, creating engineered realities that register as more authentic and trustworthy than lived experience itself. For the technological architects and their corporate backers, these developments represent unprecedented control over human perception, attention, and behavior, a power once attributed only to divine forces. For the remaining billions caught in these invisible webs, a profoundly unsettling question lingers in the gathering darkness. In a world where thoughts can be implanted, emotions manipulated, and behaviors directed before they emerge into conscious awareness, who, if anyone, will remain behind the wheel of their own mind when the technological storm finally breaks? She sat in her childhood bedroom, fingers trembling over a keyboard that once brought her comfort, now rippling only static noise through her thoughts. A piercing quiet enveloped the house as her father stood just outside the door, reading the hospital intake forms over and over, each word delivering another blow to his trust in reality. Her online interactions, they learned, had not merely influenced her. They had reprogrammed her emotional reflexes, filtered her worldview through a lattice of false assumptions and subtly rewritten memories, until even she no longer recognized what was true. Every notification had served as a psychological trigger, every scroll a step deeper into neurological rewiring. Across the world, similar quiet implosions unfolded in suburban living rooms and city apartments. Families gradually shattered by ideological radicalization, so subtle it appeared as personal growth. Friendships torn by algorithm-prescribed paranoia, disguised as enlightenment. Children lost to closed-loop illusions that mimicked authenticity with frightening precision. The damage manifested in subtle ways, visible in the vacant stares during family dinners when devices were reluctantly set aside, in the increasing inability to distinguish between marketing narratives and personal desires, in the growing conviction that strangers online understood them better than loved ones across the table. And yet, as bleak as this present reality appears, a reckoning stirs softly and whispers among the minds who've begun to see through the illusion. Researchers demanding algorithmic transparency at professional risk, psychologists developing new protocols to restore fractured empathy, technologists defecting from the very systems they helped build, bearing internal documents that reveal the calculated harm behind engagement metrics. But the question remains unresolved, pulsing beneath headlines and hidden metrics alike. Are these merely isolated sparks in the darkness, or the first cries of resistance from a species struggling to reclaim the sanctity of thought itself, a fundamental battle for the last truly private human territory, the inner landscape of mind? Quiet moments before the screen goes black, a whispered truth lingers like smoke in the air, unanswered and unresolved. No sirens warn of this invasion. No visible barriers fall, as thought itself becomes contested territory in our most intimate mental landscapes. Somewhere tonight, a child logs on for the first time, unaware they're stepping into the world's most advanced psychological theater, where every reaction, hesitation, and emotional response will be meticulously recorded, analyzed, and ultimately used to reshape their perception of reality. Somewhere else, a parent stares into the growing void between them and the person their child once was, searching their eyes for recognition, wondering when that emotional distance became so vast, so seemingly unbridgeable. In sterile laboratories, scientists map the human brain with clinical precision under cold fluorescent lights, while in gleaming corporate auditoriums, executives unveil new manipulation loops, disguised as features with practiced smiles and carefully crafted enthusiasm. Behind it all, a silent countdown continues toward a psychological point of no return. How much of humanity's collective future will be authored by minds not fully conscious of their own authorship, decisions made without true autonomy, desires manufactured rather than discovered? The screen gradually fades, but the question remains brightly lit in the darkness, flickering behind our eyelids in the quiet hours when we finally put our devices down. When influence becomes truly indistinguishable from identity itself, how will any of us know what part of our consciousness was ever genuinely our own?